A year after Connect-A-Palooza, is this the season that Tennessee finally makes their first ever Final Four?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. This is my guy, Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listen or watch to kick off the brand new week. And want to remind you, you can catch every episode ad-free at our friends at Amazon Music. Special shout out to all the everydayers joining us, as well as all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Andy, it's great to be back together after a loaded, basically first conference slate of the season where every conference is now up and running with non-con games out of the way. Man, what a crazy, crazy weekend it was. And thankfully, we've got now more content to help unpack that because, Andy, on Saturday night, we had our first ever Locked On College Basketball game night hosted by our friend Leaf Tulane, who's going to step in and do it for us every Saturday night. You and I will rotate in and join. It was me this weekend because you were off at a game. Andy, it was a great experience. We had a great crowd in there. And, man, just what a fun way to capture the magic of Saturday college basketball. Folks, if you missed out, make sure to join us next week, this upcoming Saturday. It'll be kind of as games are wrapping up. But also you should know, if you missed it, that's where we talked about most of the like nitty gritty action of Saturday. And that's what that will be. And then we'll save like big picture conversations for Monday shows like today. So make sure you go back and check that out. It's both on YouTube and in your podcast feed. So you got that. Andy, for today though, we will get to some Big Ten action from the weekend. Including Illinois and Maryland having very different Pacific Northwest experiences this weekend. We'll get to a six-pack, but first, Andy, we got to start with the fact that we now finally are down to our lone remaining undefeated team in all of college basketball because Oklahoma got blitzed down in Tuscaloosa, and then we also had Florida going to Rupp Arena and losing to Kentucky. I finally got that straight after all the trouble I had with it on Friday's show. Good grief. Tennessee handles their business against Arkansas on Saturday, and now it is Rick Barnes' team as the lone remaining undefeated team in college hoops. Andy, I had some opportunity on Saturday's game night to talk about this. You did not. What do you think about these Vols? Is this the year, the Vols, is this the year they finally make the first ever Final Four in program history?
Yeah, they sure look great so far this season. And I think, in terms of being the last remaining undefeated team, certainly some circumstance kind of allows them to be in that position just by virtue of not playing a road game to start conference play the way that both Oklahoma and Florida did. The fact that, Florida had to go play at Kentucky, a top 10 team in the country. Oklahoma had to go play a top 5 team in the country in Alabama on the road, whereas Tennessee got to play at home against a good but not nearly as good Arkansas team. Having said that, this Tennessee team is great. I mean, they're really, really good. They're the best defensive team in the country per Ken Pom. I think per the eye test, at least for me, they're the best defensive team in the country. I think there's some arguments for Duke, and there's always arguments for Houston, and UCLA has played great on that end of the floor. But this Tennessee team is they really have all the pieces. And we weren't sure that was going to be the case because last year's team seemingly also had all of the pieces with Dalton Knecht, the superstar that they add in the transfer portal from Northern Colorado. And that team kind of felt like, hey, this is the missing piece. We have this great defensive team, this veteran team, but we needed to go to score. We needed to go to bucket getter. And they go out, they get Dalton Knecht. He's everything you could have possibly asked for and more. This team goes, makes a deep run in the tournament, but loses to a phenomenal Purdue team. And so this year is kind of like, well, they're losing Knecht. They're losing Santiago Vescovi, who's a huge part of that team over the last half decade.
Jonas Aidoo's gone.
Yeah, Jonas Aidoo's gone. Toby Awaka's gone. Like they lose some players in the front court. And then the big question, though, is how do you replace Knecht? And they kind of did it in a way that I think more so than people would have really expected. I had high expectations for Chaz Lanier. He was a highly regarded player in the transfer portal. The fit was very similar. He's a similar position. He's a similar sharpshooter. He's coming from a similar mid-major program in North Florida, where he'd averaged about 20 points per game. He'd shot 44% from three. Like, he was bringing kind of a lot of the same skill sets with him. But to be able to have successfully done this again is still remarkable. Like, it's still, like, you can talk about mid-major transfers coming up and succeeding until they don't. Ask North Carolina fans how they feel about Cade Tyson at this point. Like, sometimes but sometimes
I don't have to ask them, Andy. They're all telling me. So
I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are. I mean, it's, a lot of times these guys do succeed, but they don't always. And for Tennessee to kind of really desperately have needed it 2 years in a row. I think this roster in particular, without Vescovi and without, some of the oomph in the front court, could really needed that scoring punch. And Lanier is scoring almost exactly the same points per game at Tennessee that he had at North Florida in the Atlantic Sun. And now he's in the SEC doing the same stuff. He scores 29 against Arkansas in that game. He's shooting even better from the 3-point line. And I think, Lanier is the biggest kind of storyline for why Tennessee is undefeated, why Tennessee is a legitimate contender to go to an Elite Eight, to go to their first ever Final Four. They've never done it as a program. Rick Barnes, who's been coaching since 1987, has only gone to one Final Four, and yet this team is it's early January, there's still a lot of time left, but this team is in a position to do that again because of Lanier, but also because Zakai Ziegler is phenomenal. He's averaging over 8 assists per game. And this team is they have so much veteran experience. 6 of their 8 rotation players are seniors. One of them, Felix Akpara, is a junior, and then Cade Phillips is a sophomore. Everybody else is a senior on this roster, including Darlington Dubar, who's a 5th-year senior. Like, this team is old. They're experienced. They have a lot of roster continuity. They have a superstar scorer. They're elite defensively. Like, there's a lot to really like about this Tennessee team right now, and they're not going to stay undefeated for long. I mean, the SEC is so good. I mean, they got Florida on
tomorrow.
Tuesday.
They got to go to Florida tomorrow.
Right, yeah, they got to go to Gainesville tomorrow. Like, that is a ridiculously hard thing to do, and they may lose that game, and that doesn't take away a single thing in my mind that we're talking about right now about how great this team is and how likely they are. Because, in fact, the fact that they're going to play a gauntlet for the next 2 months makes me feel even more confident about their ability to be ready to make a deep run in March.
And it's funny, like you mentioned, Dubar. I remember a lot of people this offseason were like, I feel like maybe we even had this conversation at some point. It could be Dubar leading the way. It could be Lanier leading the way. And that's not even a competition right now. Sure. No disrespect to Dubar, but he's just not coming close to doing it at the level that Lanier is doing it, who, oh, by the way, is the SEC's leading scorer right now. I mean, that's crazy what he's doing, and really impressive there. Now, to the detractors, Andy, because there are going to be some doubters with Tennessee until they start facing some of these big SEC games. Why? Their schedule hasn't had the same oomph to it that, like, we haven't even mentioned this school yet, but like Auburn, who you said as we were doing show prep today, like Auburn has, was it 7 quad 1 games? You said, I'm not looking at
they've played 7 quad 1 games. They've won 6, which is twice as many as Tennessee.
That itself is crazy. Yep. But also, if I remember correctly, what you said to me, none of them have been at home.
Yeah, they have played 7 quad 1 games. All of them have been on the road, or either neutral sites or on the road. In fact, they only played one of them on the road, and that was the Duke game, which they lost. Their other ones were all neutral sites.
And when you look at what Tennessee has done, yes, it's undefeated, but their best win is Illinois. Now, that's a true road game.
Yeah.
They beat Louisville, true road game. We're going to talk about the Cardinals later in the show. That's a good win. They beat Baylor on a neutral, and now they've beaten Arkansas at home. Those are their best wins, but I really am ready to see it against Florida tomorrow. Yeah. I'm ready for them to have to go to Auburn on Saturday, January 25th. Oh, by the way, my birthday, right? Like, so there's these things that I think that's what the detractors would say is they haven't played to quite the elite schedule. It's a solid schedule, Andy. Hear me saying nothing negative about it. I just think that's probably where the detractors would be. And the question of, I think the offense is more well-rounded than last year where they had to rely on Connect so much.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that we'll have to see against some strong defenses is what happens when a team's able to take Lanier away. Can Milicic do it? Can Ziegler call his own number? We'll have to find out with some of those things.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question that I have for this team right now is what happens when Lanier has a bad game, because that's what tripped this team up was last year was when Connect would struggle, and nobody's going to be perfect. I mean, no player is going to have a great game every single game. It almost never happens. It really doesn't ever happen. And for Tennessee, excuse me, I think that they have the balance to kind of be in a position where that doesn't trip them up as much as it did last year. And I think they hopefully will have learned from last year where that was a problem for them. But it's also a question of how quickly do you respond to that? How quickly do you realize, hey, this isn't working, we need to make a plan? And if you wait till you're down 12, can you crawl back into it? Those are the kind of things that can trip you up. Again, they're going to lose probably at minimum 5 or 6 games, maybe 4 or 5 games in the SEC. And that doesn't mean anything about them as a negative team. It's just the SEC is really, really good. And how they respond to those losses and kind of evaluate what they need to do differently will determine whether this is a great regular season Rick Barnes team that flames out in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, which is a story that's been told time and time again in his career, or whether this team actually breaks through, makes the Final Four, and legitimately contends for a national championship, because they're good enough to do it, but it doesn't mean they're going to get there.
And one final thing, Andy, before we quickly move on, is, part of this discussion for us is this the best team in America right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we have to make sure to draw a delineation between best and most deserving. And what I mean by that is, I think that Tennessee is clearly the deserving number 1 team in the nation right now, especially as we look about it in the AP poll, where it is a resume-based thing, not predictive like most of the computer stuff is. And so for me, it would be hard not to have them as the number 1 team. I think they are the most deserving. But Andy, in your estimation, A, do you agree with that? And B, would you say that they are the best? And if not, who is?
I would agree with that, and I would say no, Auburn is the best. Auburn has twice as many quad 1 wins. Their only loss was a road game against Duke, which is a really difficult place to pick up a W. Their wins are more impressive. They beat Iowa State, who I think has a very strong argument to be 3rd. They beat Houston, who has a pretty decent argument to be maybe not 4th, but top 10 for sure. They beat Carolina, which we'll see how that ages. They beat Purdue. They beat Ohio State. I mean, this team has won some phenomenal games. To me, Auburn's resume is a little bit better. I do think Tennessee probably deserves to be number 1. I think people will quibble with that, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, if you told me these two teams were going to play each other 10 times on a neutral floor, I think Auburn would win more of them. And that's, I think, the only team that I would say that comfortably about versus Tennessee, with Iowa State and Duke kind of being right in that mix as well. But I think Auburn is the team that I would take as the number 1 team in the country right now.
And it's funny, Andy, because let's remember Iowa State was throttling Auburn in Maui, and Auburn had a great comeback to win that game, which is funny. I wonder how, had that result gone the opposite way, it would change our conversation.
Well, I think we talked briefly about Illinois being the best win for Tennessee, and that's a win that's aging really well for the Vols, because they had a great trip out west, beating Oregon badly on Thursday and then winning against Washington. Meanwhile, the other team that went out west, Maryland, not such a great trip for them. We're going to talk about that and some other Big Ten action to unpack from the weekend coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And the FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Since we're talking about the SEC, this is a perfect time to share those SEC regular season odds, which right now, FanDuel favors Auburn at plus 115. Tennessee is, of course, next at plus 310, followed pretty closely behind by Bama at plus 360. After that, you get Kentucky at 1,100, Mississippi State and Texas A&M both at 2,200, and perhaps surprisingly, Florida all the way down at plus 2,600, despite a very close game against that same Kentucky team on Saturday. If you like any of those odds, if you like any of the other game odds for tonight or Tuesday, where there's a great slate of games, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And as a reminder, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. It's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Isaac, moving away from the SEC and our big picture conversation about Tennessee being the last remaining undefeated team to talk about a team, one of the best teams that Tennessee has beaten already this season, the Illini of Illinois, who had a very, very productive trip out west as part of the new Big Ten, where you go out to the Pacific Northwest and you turn around and go all the way out to the East Coast, because that's the nature of college athletics these days. Illinois goes out to play Washington and Oregon. They played Oregon on Thursday. We didn't get to that game on Friday's show because we had recorded before it was over, but Illinois absolutely stomped on Oregon, scored 109 points in Eugene against the Ducks, and then turn around, play Washington over the weekend, and were able to win. It was not nearly as dominant against a team that is not as good as Oregon, but Washington, a furious comeback. They were down as many as 17. They were down 13 with under 12 minutes to go. And yet behind a 31-point game from DJ Davis off the bench for the Huskies, they come all the way back, tie this thing at 75. Illinois still manages to get the W, though. They go 2-0, a fantastic weekend for them. Isaac, Illinois is one of those teams that we've talked about a few times on the show, and they kind of just get in the mix of the Big Ten with conversations around Purdue and conversations around now Oregon and UCLA and the Michigan schools, which are both looking strong. But this Illinois team really impressed me this weekend in particular, mostly in that game against Oregon, which I think some of that result said a little bit more about Oregon. But this young Illinois team has played extremely well. Kasparis Jakusionis has been fantastic. Will Riley has been fantastic. Zvonimir Ivasic's brother, Timoslav, has been very good. Like, this is a team that is starting to come together and peak seemingly at a really good time for Coach Underwood.
Yeah, dude, it's crazy. Andy, do you remember the conversations we had from what Coach Underwood said about this team and where they would excel and where they wouldn't?
Yeah, I think he said 7th grade teams would score like 80 on them.
I bring that up because you want to know what's crazy at KenPom right now, and it's already up. We're recording pretty quickly after they beat Washington. It's already updated. Illinois ranks 19th at KenPom in offensive efficiency. They are 13th in defensive efficiency, Andy. So, and I know that the efficiency is different from the eye test and what we see in some of the raw numbers, but I just use that to say, while the offense is doing all this, man, the defense is a big part of the story of why Illinois is sitting at 11-3 right now, 11th at KenPom, and 5th, Andy, 5th in the net right now. Illinois is. That's crazy stuff. What's interesting, they've got these 3 losses. Alabama, I think that game was maybe in Birmingham, if I remember correctly, lost 100-87, lost to Tennessee at home by just 2 points. That was on a Saturday in December. If we could take away their loss at Northwestern in overtime by 4 points, we're talking about a 12-2 Illinois team with only losses basically at Alabama and by 2 at home to Tennessee, who we just, praise. I think people would maybe be thinking nationally about Illinois a little bit differently, but they're sliding under the radar, I think, a lot right now. Meanwhile, Coleman Hawkins sitting over here in Manhattan, Kansas, probably wishing he could still be part of this thing because he's on a completely different kind. It's just really, really impressive. And I truly think Illinois is sliding under the radar a little bit, but maybe not so much after what they did to Oregon on Thursday, Andy. And as you said, so much of it is led by these freshmen. And I think that's just a big storyline to watch for Illinois is, are these freshmen going to be able to maintain this high level of play? I know Will Riley, has kind of fallen out of the starting lineup, played like 10 minutes in the Washington game on Sunday. But the other guys are still doing it at this very high level. Jakusionis, man, he's just so impressive to me of what he does in an all-around sort of way, kind of similar to Cooper Flagg. I love his game, and it's impressive to watch Illinois yet again doing it.
Yeah, he's been extremely impressive, and I think that's the part of the conversation that I think makes what they've done more impressive, is that they are so young and that they are so reliant on youth. And you see that with in college basketball, you see so many teams that rely so heavily on their young players, and they often have lull periods. They often have games, their first road game in conference play, for example, often it results in them not playing as well as you'd expect because the young guys are not prepared for that. And that actually kind of leads nicely into the conversation about Maryland, where they go 0-2 on this trip out west. And I don't think anybody had Maryland quite at the same level as Illinois, but you wouldn't have expected them they lose to Oregon. That's fine. Oregon's still a top 10 team. They won't be by the time the polls come out, but they're still going to be a ranked team. And that's not a terrible loss for them, but losing to Washington's not great. Washington hasn't looked all that great. I know they played well against Illinois here, but they still didn't win that game. And what happened in the game for Maryland against Washington was Derik Queen didn't show up. He's a freshman who's on the road traveling across the country, and I mean literally across the country. Maryland to Washington is a massive trip, and so I don't think it's like unforgivable that Derik Queen had a bad game against Washington. They have some decent size. Great Osibor obviously is a big and very talented player for them, but when you are reliant on young players and you are in a conference where your road games are cross-country trips, this kind of thing can happen. And for Maryland, they tried to rebound from this loss to Washington to go out and beat a really good Oregon team. Were unable to do so. Close for Oregon. They obviously really wanted to make sure they didn't go 0-2 at home against Illinois and Maryland. That would have been a really tough stretch for Dana Altman's team. So I thought that this Maryland team is, I'm not shocked that they weren't able to beat Oregon. I'm not even really that shocked that they lost to Washington, but it's not good for them to have lost these two games back to back in this situation. And for Derik Queen, like, you got to rebound. You got to find a way to kind of get back in that mix for this team that's, again, kind of in that middle, not a top 5 team in the conference, not a top 3 team, but not a bottom team, just kind of somewhere in that 6 to 12 range in the Big Ten. And right now for Maryland, like, they don't want to get lost in the shuffle, but this was a tough start to the year 2025 for them on this road trip.
And a big reason, I want to go back to the Oregon side of it, that they're able to get over the top and come back and win this game is Jackson Shelstad kind of finally shows up. Andy, I think it's, speaking of flying under the radar, he's not been having a great season so far. Coming into this game, shooting 26.7% from 3, 38% from the field. He's doing fine at the free throw line, but man, goes off in this game, has his second 20-point game of the season, goes 8 of 10 from the field, a perfect Andy, 5 of 5 from 3, 5 rebounds to go with it for 23 points, really helping Oregon get over the hump here. A critical win for them, kind of a frustrating loss for Maryland, who really had a chance to pick up a road win here.
Couple other results in the Big Ten. It was a pretty exciting weekend, really, for the conference. UCLA goes down at Nebraska. Nebraska's been playing some good ball. They have some losses that are questionable. They lost to St. Mary's on a neutral site. It was a 3-point loss, but the Gales haven't quite looked like themselves this year, so that's not a great loss for Fred Hoiberg's team. But they go out, they beat this UCLA team that's been fantastic on the season. They score 66 against them, which isn't a ton, but against UCLA, that's quite a bit. UCLA has been one of the best defensive teams in the country. So again, I think the larger conversation for a lot of these results for the Big Ten is simply going on a super long road trip is difficult. And UCLA goes across the country to play Nebraska, or halfway across the country, I should say, and has struggles to do what they need to do to win that game. Michigan did not struggle in their cross-country trip. They go to USC, win 85-74. I think USC among those 4 West Coast Big Ten schools is probably the worst of that group. So I'm not that surprised that Michigan was able to go out there and get a W. But some interesting results in the Big Ten, and it's going to be kind of just fun to see how, especially the middle of this conference, shakes out. Because to me, the difference between 6-12 and 6-14 even is probably not going to be that many games. So having a crappy road trip early in the conference slate, I mean, that might be enough for a team like Maryland to not be where they want to be at the end of the season.
Yeah, man, it's unfortunate. We'll see what happens moving forward. Nebraska got wins now over UCLA, got a win over Indiana, who, that's kind of in that middling thing that you're talking about here, because Indiana had a nice little weekend for themselves, beating both Rutgers and Penn State. And so for Nebraska to have both of theirs on their resume, and he's going to be
helpful. They beat Creighton too. They beat Creighton.
That's true, man. Yeah. Woo! How about Purdue? I know the final score wasn't all that big, but up 41-18 at halftime over Northwestern on Sunday. Crazy stuff. Well, Andy, we got to get to our 6-pack. Providence held a 14-point lead in the second half at UConn, but a massive run for the Huskies in the second half, 26-5, gave them a big and critical win over the Friars at home. We discussed that and the results around the country in our weekly 6-pack coming up in just a second. Right after we tell you about Game Time. Hey, attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games, man, great opportunities. And I can't wait to make new memories with the updated college football playoff format and extra teams involved. Andy, these games have been great, man. Like that Texas-Arizona State game that last week, good grief. Game Time, y'all. It has this new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for every event even easier. It just basically filters out the fluff to show you only the best stuff so you don't have to waste your time. Recently, I had used Game Time Picks to find great tickets for my family. We're going to go see Dude Perfect live on tour. My kids are all ate up with it. And so I was so grateful for Game Time to help me find tickets for that event. We even were like, are these seats going to be good? Let's look at the views from our seat. Man, we loved it. We went and snatched them up. It's great. And we've talked about Tennessee at Florida tomorrow night. There's not many tickets available, but upper level, $38, Andy, 10% off that ticket. That's a phenomenal deal to get yourself in the door to what's probably going to be a bonkers O-Dome tomorrow night. Y'all go check that out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, Andy, we always play this fun game where we keep each other guessing on who's starting the six-pack and who's not. Here we go. Providence at UConn on Sunday afternoon. The Huskies have a massive comeback for an 87-84 win. It got a little tight at the very end, although Providence had a bucket basically at the buzzer to make it look a little tighter than it was. Andy, the Friars were up 14 in this game, still led by 12 at the half, 39-27. But UConn just kept chipping away, and it ultimately felt inevitable, if we're being honest about that. Aiden Mahaney, who's had his struggles this year, had a couple nice buckets along the way, but season high for Hassan Diarra, 19 points to lead the way for UConn. Unfortunately for Bryce Hopkins, still not playing. He's been in and out of the lineup, but this was his fourth straight game missing for Providence. Providence has lost all of those games and 8 of their last 10 after a 5-0 start. I think it might just be a lost season for him, unfortunately, Andy. I hate that to see it. UConn still has not lost in the lower 48 states, Andy. They lost those 3 games out in Maui. No other blemishes. Crazy stuff. Really intriguing matchup at Villanova on Wednesday.
Moving over to the Big 12, 2 teams that came into conference play with very different momentum than they have after their first 2 games. Arizona kind of limped in to the Big 12 with some struggles in non-conference, uncharacteristic for them. Meanwhile, Cincinnati was rolling, 16th ranked team. Yet now Arizona picks up a 72-67 win on Saturday, meaning they are now 2-0 in conference play. Cincinnati drops to 0-2 in the Big 12. For Arizona, they've now won 5 of their last 6 after going 1-2 in that struggle in the battle for Atlantis. Jaden Bradley had 15 on 5 of 9 shooting, but the real star for them was freshman Carter Bryant, 14 points on perfect 5 of 5 shooting, 3 of 3 from deep. I think he only played 14 minutes and yet had 15 points for them. That was really much needed offense off the bench for Tommy Lloyd's club. For Cincinnati, Daniel Skillings has 18 and 6 rebounds. Weirdly, all 6 of his rebounds were on the offensive glass. Don't know what the record is for most rebounds in a game without a single defensive rebound. It can't be a whole lot more than that. That is not something you see all the time. Dylan Mitchell, 13 and 7 for them. Again, they are now 0-2 in league play, but still 10 and 3 overall on the season.
Andy, do not upset the Kansas Jayhawks either by West Virginia beating them on New Year's Eve or UCF beating them last year down in Florida, because Kansas goes on the road to UCF on Sunday, an absolute blowout, 99-48. Kansas wins this game. As a reminder, Kansas did lose at UCF last year, 65-60. Jayhawks were up 44-25 in the break. And that was the less bad half, because it was worse after halftime, 55-23 in favor of the Jayhawks. Hunter Dickinson leads the way, 27 points on 12 of 17 from the field, 9 rebounds and 3 blocks. Andy, we noticed as we were looking back at this game, Kansas, 6 of 10 at the free throw line. And I was like, feels like they should be getting there more. Andy, we went and looked inside the numbers. On the season, the Jayhawks, 359th in free throw rate. They're 347th in free throws made per game and 356th in free throws attempted per game. For a team that's kind of got a flawed roster construction, can't make threes similar to last year, you'd think they'd be attacking the rim more. It's wild to see that they haven't. By the way, how fun to have a Big 12 game on Sunday. That's kind of a new wrinkle. We're going to be getting that almost every Sunday this regular season. Make sure you're ready for that.
Moving back to the SEC, the 13th ranked Aggies of A&M were playing Texas on Saturday. They sent the Longhorns out to play Texas A&M in their first conference game as members of the SEC. Welcome to the conference. And folks, this game was actually tied at halftime, 37-all, and yet A&M ultimately rolls to a 80-60 20-point victory. They win that second half 43-23. And Isaac, the crazy thing is not only winning a game by 20 that you were tied at halftime, but they did it while shooting 2 of 19 from 3. I had to blink and look at the box score once again to make sure I saw that right, because that is absolutely crazy to win a game by 20 when you shoot 10.5% from 3. They did shoot at a blistering hot 25 of 38 on 2-pointers. That's 65.8%. The Longhorns,
that'll do it.
They're struggling to defend on the inside in that game. Zurich Phelps led the way for A&M. He had 18 on 6 of 8 shooting. Wade Taylor IV, just 1 of 7 from 3. This Aggies team last year, this was a big storyline for them, was the 3-point shooting, the games similar to this, but they didn't win these games last year. And so for Buzz Williams' club to find a way to get a W here, I do think that this game probably says a fair amount about Texas and the struggles that they might be about to encounter in the SEC. It could be a rough year for Rodney Terry and the Longhorns, but you got to give credit to A&M. I was a lot lower on them coming into the season and remained lower on them even as they kind of had a strong non-conference, because I knew that these kind of shooting performances were going to happen. But if they're going to win games like this, this could be a really, really nice season for the Aggies.
Hey, big week, Andy, by the way, for Texas. They host Auburn tomorrow and host Tennessee on Saturday. You want to make a name for yourself? Go win those. But honestly, good luck. Andy, how about the Louisville Cardinals trucked Virginia in Charlottesville on Saturday, 70-50. They were led in scoring by 2 different bench players, both Abubakar Traore, recently back from injury. Great to see after they, Case and Pryor out for the season. 15 points from both he and Rain Smith off the bench, who feels like he's always raining in threes. Pun completely intended there, by the way. Different spelling. I don't even care. I'm all in on homophones. Cardinals are now 3-1. I don't even know if that's the right part of speech. I always get them confused. Cardinals are now 3-1 in ACC play. Their only loss is at home to Duke by 11, which honestly is respectable.
Yeah.
But Andy, their 3 wins in the ACC, 2 of them are on the road, at FSU by 14, at Virginia by 20, and they beat Carolina at home last week by 13. Louisville might have a little something despite these injuries. They're now 10-5 overall, just 2 wins shy of matching their combined total for the last 2 seasons, where they won just 8 and then 4 games. Really going to learn a lot this week. I just said that about Texas. Same is true for Louisville. They host Clemson on Tuesday, and then they're at Pitt next Saturday. If they could win or even split those games, that'd be major for Pat Kelsey's club.
Well, Isaac, the really exciting day during the week this week for games is Tuesday, but we're going to close out our 6-pack talking about a couple of games to check out on Monday. Again, it's not the most exciting slate. We do have 4 games we want to talk about here quickly. South Florida going on the road to take on Wichita State in American Athletic Conference action. That game is at 7 Eastern time on ESPN2. FanDuel currently favors the Shockers by 8.5 points. And then we got Wisconsin going on the road at Rutgers. Going to be fun to see how Ace Bailey looks, particularly if Dylan Harper does not play as he's dealing with an injury. 7 Eastern time for that game on FS1. No FanDuel line, presumably because of the Harper injury, but Ken Pom right now has Wisconsin -4. Excuse me, I said Harper's injury. He was just sick. So we'll still see what the update is with him for that game. But either way, it should be fun to see how those 2 teams square off. Then Big 12 action, TCU on the road at Houston, 9 Eastern time on ESPN2. FanDuel, Houston, 18.5.
Such a big line.
That is Houston doesn't blow teams out that often. Granted, they just did something real dirty to BYU over the weekend. So we'll see if they can do the same to TCU. And then closing it out with another Big 10 game, Ohio State going on the road at Minnesota, 9 Eastern time, also on FS1. FanDuel currently favors Ohio State 5.5. Again, not the best slate on Monday, but buckle up because Tuesday is going to be a tremendous day of college basketball games. But folks, that is going to wrap it up for our show today. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And thank you to those of you who checked out the game night episode on Saturday with Leaf Tulane and Isaac. We got some more fun shows planned for you all over the weekends going forward this season. So it should be a lot of fun to have those out. Check it out if you haven't yet. It is in your feed. As always, though, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Poke. And until Tuesday when we get you ready for that great slate of games, peace out.